New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Emmy Vadnais, co-host with Jeffrey Mishlove. Our topic today is the mirror effect. My guest is Lynne McTaggart, who is an award-winning journalist and investigator of intention experiments. Through her group intention experiments, she noticed that positive intention not only affected the recipients, it also reflected back on the senders. Lynne is author of 7 books, including The Field, The Quest for the Secret Force of the Universe, The Intention Experiment, Using Your Thoughts to Change Your Life and the World, The Bond, How to Fix Your Falling Down World, and The Power of 8, Harnessing the Miraculous Energies of a Small Group to Heal Others, Your Life, and the World. If you enjoy this program, please like, subscribe, press the bell icon, and share. Lynne is joining us from London, England. Now I'll switch over to the internet video. Welcome, Lynne. It is wonderful to be back with you on New Thinking Aloud today.
It's great to be here with you. Thank you.
In our last interview, we talked about group intention and psychokinesis, and I'll link to that interview in the upper right corner of the screen. Through your intention experiments, you began noticing a phenomenon that you called the mirror effect, and that's what we'll be discussing today. For those who may not be familiar, could you just give us a brief understanding of your intention experiments and when you began noticing this phenomenon?
Back in 2007, I published a book called The Intention Experiment because I'd done a book called The Field and talked with a number of forward-thinking and pioneering physicists and other scientists who were doing work demonstrating that thoughts are an actual something with the capacity to change physical matter. So the journalist in me, and probably at my heart, I'm still a hard-nosed investigative reporter as I was when I first started out, I kept thinking, well, what are we talking about here? How far can we take this? And I thought about the fact that the field was in 30 languages. So I thought, well, I have a lot of readers out there. And I also thought about the fact that I knew a lot of frontier scientists working in all kinds of areas. So I thought if I just put them together, I could test this because I'd have the biggest global laboratory in the world. And that's what I did. Back in 2007, I launched the Intention Experiment, the book, which was also an invitation to take part in these experiments. So we started out small, and I worked with a variety of scientists working at prestigious universities like Princeton, Penn State, University of Arizona, University of California, and places in Europe too. So I couldn't get accused of bias. We started out just trying to affect the light emissions of a leaf and making seeds grow faster, moved on to trying to purify water. And then we started focusing on lowering violence in violent or war-torn areas. And this was, I guess, in 2008. And I decided to start surveying the participants. So for the first big peace intention experiment, as we called them, we had about 15,000 participants. And I sent out surveys to all of them. And I just wanted to find out, were they able to get on my website? Because we had all those people coming on the website at the same time. What was the experience like for them? And I was shocked, really shocked, when I got back the results, because it wasn't just talking about, yeah, I got on. It was saying things like, I felt like I was in the tractor beam of Star Wars. I was crying uncontrollably. I had goosebumps up and down my arms. I felt almost unbearable heat, or all kinds of physical feelings. And remember, these were people participating from their individual computers or phones coming onto my website. So they weren't in the same room with other people. They were all by themselves, but they were recording these extraordinary physical effects. But even more than that, about a third of them reported having some sort of healing, some sort of improvement in a current condition or outright cure. They also reported having more peace in their own lives. So they were getting along with estranged partners or bosses or parents or children. They were also feeling more love for everyone they came in contact with. About 40% said they were getting along better with their loved ones or estranged relations. And about 50% said they were more in love with strangers. They were hugging strangers, basically. So I was absolutely blown away by this. But I started seeing this both in the big intention experiments and also my Power of 8 groups. When I shrunk it all down to just groups of 8, the senders were having as many healing effects as the recipients of intention.
So what is happening in your Power of 8 groups?
When I first started doing Power of 8 groups, it was simply to shrink down what was going on in the intention experiments, because I was seeing with the intention experiments incredible healings too. And as I say, now just to give you an example of our very first intention experiment, before I get into Power of 8 groups, there was a woman called Sylvie Fracca. She is Italian, was living in France with her boyfriend, and she is a translator, and she was working night and day, really even losing sleep, doing all-nighters, etc. She participated in that first peace intention experiment for Sri Lanka, which was undergoing a 25-year war at the time. And something extraordinary happened. She participated for 10 minutes of the 8 days we held it. And that's all people have to do is 10 minutes when they're involved with an intention experiment with me. We decided to run it every day for 10 minutes over 8 days. She realized during the week that she had big revelations about how she had allowed herself to be used in her job and made a vow to herself never to do that again, and carried that on, because I talked to her years later and she was still in control of her life from that moment. But more interesting is what happened to her partner. He is a total skeptic, or he was. She was a Reiki practitioner. He never even allowed her to do that. But she asked him to stand in for her one day to do the 10-minute intention. As he came onto my website, which showed pictures of the Sri Lankan war and showed pictures of peace there afterward, he felt himself pulled into the photos I was showing, and something happened to his state of consciousness, and he felt it had altered. And he came out of there saying, "What on earth happened to me?" And it completely changed his life. He became much more interested in exploring these ideas, allowed her to do Reiki on him, wanted to find out about altered state of consciousness, the power of intention, and so much more. And this was an ardent atheist, an ardent skeptic. So I was starting to watch that all around and decided, as I say, to shrink this down to a Power of 8 groups. And I did this in my first workshop. And this was again in 2008, expecting it to be very mild, feel-good effects. But that's not what happened. After we put people into groups, had them send intention to a member of the group, with a health challenge, we were hearing stories of extraordinary healing and transformation, of someone with depression who said it was lifted, of somebody with a terrible arthritis who walked in normally that day, somebody with cataracts who said they were 80% better. Now, to give you an example of some of the extraordinary stories I've heard, and there have been thousands of them. I hear them every year on my year-long Power of 8 Intention Masterclass, where I teach people over successive weeks, and then I put them in groups. And they meet with their groups every week for a year. And I monitor what goes on with them and coach them as the year goes on. One of the many, many extraordinary stories has to do with Lori. Lori had retinal damage in both eyes, was going blind, couldn't drive anymore, could barely see. She decided to join the Power of 8 Masterclass, and her group did an intention for her. And she had gone to many doctors before that who said, there's nothing we can do. You will be going blind. And she had moved, and she went to a new doctor after her Power of 8 group. And the doctor said, you don't have any retina damage. It's fine. And within a few days, her eyesight completely came back. It's now 20/20. Now, that's one example. We've had another person who had lost her hearing because of radiotherapy. She had cancer in that ear. The doctor said she'll never hear again in that ear. Her group did Power of 8 intentions for her. She now got her hearing back. She recognized it one day when the phone rang, and without thinking, put it to that ear and could hear everything. She's got her hearing back. We've had reversals of stage 4 cancer, like Esther, who decided to avoid chemotherapy and radiotherapy. She had stage 4 melanoma. She came to a retreat of mine, didn't even think she was going to be able to come, came with her son, and I had really encouraged them to come. They had booked it, and then she got her diagnosis and was very weak. And I just said, well, she might have a really nice last time. Just come and maybe something will happen. Well, they did one Power of 8 session for her, and it was so deep and so amazing that she came out of it and said, I am healed. Now, she's had none of that chemo and all of that stuff, as I said. When she went back to Switzerland, where she lives, she had had some, of course, naturopathic stuff, because she is a naturopath. Nothing further. Doctors checked her out, and they couldn't find tumors anywhere. So those are some of my amazing stories. Even people with genetic illnesses. There was a woman, Lisa, due for a liver transplant. She was born with a genetic defect in her liver, and her liver was full of scarring, and her spleen was swollen. Doctors said they could do nothing other than monitor it until the point where she needed a liver transplant. One Power of 8 session, she comes back, she goes to her doctor. She feels big energy going through her body. Goes back to her doctor months later, and he says, there's no liver damage anywhere. You're normal. Your liver is normal. Your spleen is normal now. And it's been years later. I spoke to her recently, and she's still completely fine. So this is the many stories I get in of healing, and it's extraordinary. But it doesn't just happen to the recipients. It also happens to the senders. They have as many healings as the people who receive.
In those Power of 8 groups, so this is, if I understand correctly, there are 8 people who meet together for a year. And through that process, are they rotating who they are sending positive intentions to?
Yes.
And how are they doing that? What methodology? What are they focusing on? Words, images, or is it up to the group? How is that delivered?
I teach them, and I give them a lot of instruction on becoming an intention master. There are a lot of things you need to do in terms of the right visualization, the right wording, working together as a group to determine who gets intention. They oftentimes do it by need. Somebody who's got stage 4 cancer will get intention first. But the whole idea of the group is to rotate around the group and maybe have 3 healing sessions per week. They're not just about physical healings. We also do, and this is something I make a big point of talking about, people need lots of healing in their lives. Maybe they need financial healing or a new career or job, or to launch a new hobby, or they have relationship difficulties, or they want a new relationship. All of that is part of the mix. And there's different languaging for every single one, every single category. Even people who want a new life purpose. Maybe they're in their 3rd act and they want to do something else more meaningful in their lives. So all of that can be intention. But as I say, the whole idea of a group is you rotate around so everybody gets a turn. You get a chance to be a sender 7/8 of the time, and then you're a receiver. And so it should pretty much every 3 or 4 weeks, you get another turn. But it almost doesn't matter because, as I say, the senders receive as much. They oftentimes are healed in the act of sending rather than the act of receiving. And when nothing is happening in their lives, when they've tried intention and their group has tried intention and they're stuck, I often say to them, get off of yourself. Start intending for someone else and see what happens. And I think that's a real underpinning of my work, which is the power of altruism. Because altruism is extraordinary. When you look at the scientific evidence for altruism, it's not just a nice thing to do, it's a necessary thing to do, because people who do things for other people live longer, healthier, happier lives. Even if you're ill with something, if you help somebody else with that illness, you're more likely to heal yourself. So I see that over and over again in the Power of 8 groups too.
Beautiful. So the mirror effect is happening in the Power of 8 groups, or did it also happen in your large group intention experiments?
The mirror effect is happening in group intention, full stop. So we see, as I say, I've run 41 intention experiments to date, 37 of which have shown measurable, positive, mostly significant effects. I'm talking about 41 official intention experiments. I've also run informal ones where we're not measuring anything. I recently did one on uniting America because our American election is, so fraught with upset polarization, hateful speech, et cetera, et cetera. And I've run informal ones for Israel and Gaza, 3 of them to date. But of those 41, as I say, 37 of the official ones have shown measurable, positive, mostly significant effects. And I have surveyed people ever since 2008 with our experiments. And consistently, we see healings. We see people who say, I'm out of pain now. My right hip feels like I've had surgery or I've taken pain relief. Or they say, my skin condition, whether it's psoriasis or something like that, is completely cleared up. Or my depression feels lifted. And these things carry on. I had when I surveyed people for one of the recent experiments, somebody wrote back and said, I participated in your 2017 Jerusalem experiment where I had Israelis and Arabs coming together. And my life has completely changed since then. There's peace in my life in every way. Other people say, I got a new job, or people were inspired to leave their soulless job and get something new. Something happens to the participants. Something happens to the senders in Power of Eight groups that is extraordinary in terms of this mirror effect, a rebound effect, so that their life heals too.
Well, clearly there is a real effect with all of this happening. What do you think is the mechanism for those group intention experiments? Because you're working beyond space and time, non-local consciousness. And what is happening, do you think, with the mirror effect? What is the mechanism there as well? Do you think that there's a connection, a similarity of what's happening between the two?
That's such a great question. There are a lot of things going on. First of all, we now know from the intention experiment that there is a similarity in what happens with subatomic particles and what happens with people holding the same thought at the same time. With subatomic particles, we know from quantum physics that once two subatomic particles have been in contact and you move one to New York and the other to Saturn, they still are connected and they affect each other. No matter what one subatomic particle does, the other one is affected, is immediately affected. It's like twins being separated at birth. You put one in California and the other one in London, and they both do things simultaneously and have the same choices. One marries a man called Jim and the other one marries a man called Jim. Both of them like the color blue. And if one falls down and breaks her leg when she's skiing at Vail, so does the other one, even if she's sitting and having a cup of coffee. So that's how non-locality, or entanglement as it also is poetically known, works. Well, it looks like the same thing happens with people. I've run experiments all around the world where I was in one place with my audience and my experiment was thousands of miles away with one of our seed experiments. I ran it 6 times in different locations. The seeds were always located in Tucson, Arizona. And my audience, for instance, the first one was in Sydney, Australia. I got photos of the seeds. We did an intention for the photo of the seeds, not the thing itself. And we had an effect, as we did with the 5 other times we did it in different locations, including one time over the internet with people scattered around the globe. So from all of that, I infer that we create a psychic internet where we are non-locally connected. And we're non-locally connected with the target too, because remember, we focused on photos of the seeds. Not even the seeds itself. The seeds were 8,000 miles away, and yet we had a measurable effect, as indicated by a University of Arizona laboratory. So we do create some sort of psychic internet. Why does this all work? Why do we demonstrate such big effects? We've done some brainwave studies on Power of Eight groups. I worked with Life University's neuroscience department. We got 7 Power of Eight groups from student volunteers who had never done anything like this before. They'd never even meditated. And we put an EEG cap on one member of each group, the senders only, not the receiver, because they were sending intention to a member of the group who had some sort of health challenge. So we measured both their brain waves and the effect on the recipients. And we found, number one, the recipients all reported improvements in pain. But more interestingly, as far as I'm concerned, the senders had major changes in brain waves. We assumed their brainwave signatures were going to be exactly like those of meditation. Increases in slower brain waves like alpha waves and theta waves. That's not what happened at all. What happened was a turning off of numerous brain waves, particularly the parts of the brain the parietal lobes that are right here and the temporal lobes here that help us navigate through space, that tell us what is me and what's not me, were dialed way down. So these were people in a state of ecstatic oneness. The brainwave signatures were almost identical to those recorded by neuroscientists at the University of Pennsylvania of Buddhist monks during ecstatic prayer and Sufi masters during chanting. So for me, these people were in a state of ecstatic oneness, and that is what happens both in the Power of Eight groups and the intention experiments. And I believe we don't get a chance to live like that ever. We don't get a chance to experience ecstatic oneness unless we are a Buddhist monk or a Sufi master. In our ordinary waking consciousness, we talk about all being one and being part of the field, but we don't experience life like that. We experience life in total separation as being lonely little people in a lonely little planet, in a lonely little universe. But here, for this moment, for these 10 minutes, we get to experience ecstatic oneness, even if, like these student volunteers at Life University, they'd never even meditated before. They've never even done any of this before. They were total novices. And yet this was a fast track to the miraculous. And I think that is where, when we sense oneness, our real birthright, our real biology, our real, the real reality of our lives, and not the scientific story we've been told, that is a gateway to healing.
Truly fantastic. So what do you think is happening with the mirror effect? Do you think it's an actual rebound? Do you think that the sender is just syncing up with the other, therefore they get the same benefits, but maybe customized or tailored to their own lives? Or do you think that maybe there are other variables where the person getting into the ways that you direct them to be in those 10 minutes is somehow impacting their breath rate and putting them into maybe a relaxation response state that has so much research behind it as well?
I think it's well beyond that. The relaxation response is really important because it helps to, that's a meditative state. It calms you down. It helps to calm your autonomic nervous system. And that's all good. But different things happen that are unlike those of meditation. As I said, the outcomes are very different from meditation. The brainwave states are very different from meditation. And there aren't too many states where people can achieve this unless they have worked for years in disciplined practice to become a Buddhist monk, or taken hours of priming when they're trying to be a Sufi master, or to get into a state, an altered state, or taken some sort of psychedelic. Our people do none of that. And it's only 10 minutes. They don't need hours of priming. They don't need years of disciplined practice. They just need a group and a common intention. What I think is happening is this. Number one, intention works. Intention has miraculous effects. It can affect seeds 8,000 miles away. It can lower violence in violent and war-torn areas. We demonstrated that with 11 peace intention experiments, and we're soon to do a new one where, for instance, with St. Louis, Missouri, the area we focused on, a neighborhood with the most violent, the highest level of violence of any place in America, lowered by 43%, when none of the other neighborhoods that we hadn't focused on in St. Louis, or St. Louis as a whole, did. In those places, violence continued to go up. And that was as measured by a professor of statistics at the University of California. So we've done amazing things with intention. We've also seen that group effects occur. When people are in a Power of Eight group, when they're in a group of any sort, there is a French psychologist, Émile Durkheim, put it, a collective effervescence. We all get hopped up by a group. because we are all tribal. Human beings are very tribal. We need community more than we need to breathe, really. We need to belong. So there is that sense of belonging, which we don't get very much these days. We're more isolated than ever before. We were fast-tracked through isolation in COVID, and that certainly proved to be quite damaging in lots of areas. 1 in 5 people still suffer from a kind of form of PTSD from being isolated so long in COVID during lockdowns. And young people particularly, they've seen that their brains have aged and cortical thinning has occurred. They've aged by about 4.5 years over what they should have been because of isolation. We need to connect. So you have that with a Power of 8 group. Then you've got altruism, a big, big piece. People who do things for other people heal. It's absolutely the case. And we've seen through numerous studies that when people are doing things for themselves, it's actually just doing things for themselves and totally focused on themselves. Their immune system markers are really poor compared to people who are living a life of service. There was a study that showed this, that the people there was one group, quite affluent, they called them pleasure seekers, who were living the dream, so to speak. And they had terrible immune system markers compared to they were perfect candidates for all the major degenerative diseases, heart attacks, Alzheimer's, diabetes, etc. Whereas the other group, just focusing on a life of service, not as affluent, but essentially incorporating altruism in their lives, had robust immune systems. These people were going to live forever. So for me, altruism is a really key piece of that whole need for community. We need to do things for other people. It doesn't just make us feel good. It keeps us alive. It gives our life meaning. And then there is this oneness piece, which I think is the big secret sauce. When people talk about being in Power of 8 groups, they talk about also entering this altered state, this sense of oneness, this sense where suddenly the possible, the improbable becomes possible. And all of that, I think, adds up to an extraordinary effect that is well beyond a simple physical effect. Sure, there are all kinds of things that happen. Just talking about physical effects, we know from groups that the autonomic nervous system, our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, has a third portion, as noted by Stephen Portuguese, talked about the polyvagal theory. And the third section of it is connection and feeling of safety. When you're in a Power of 8 group, you suddenly have this tribe that start out as perfect strangers who have your back, who are doing intention for you. That itself is extraordinarily healing on that vagus nerve. One of my favorite students who took the master class during lockdown was Jerry. And Jerry took a whole year's course where I teach, and then I put people in groups. And at the end of it, he booked it again. And I said, Jerry, you're going to learn the same stuff. He said, no, I wanted more. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, I have had more love during lockdown than I've ever had in my life from this group. I now know what love is, even if you're getting it over the airwaves. And he had all kinds of miracles in his life. His group had miracles, but probably the biggest miracle of all was the extraordinary connection that happens between these groups. Because as I say, they start out as total strangers. And I have groups that are continuing. They've been meeting for 11 years.
So perhaps there's one significant or maybe many variables that are impacting this mirror effect where people are feeling a connection to a group. So maybe their stress levels come down because, as you say, others have their back. And also versus somebody who's maybe independent and kind of feel like it's them against the world. And also there is this entanglement happening. What do you think is happening with the mirror effect? Do you think that people are getting into that state of oneness, therefore something's happening in their nervous system that just sets things in a positive way for them? Or do you think that by syncing up with these other people, they're somehow communing and there really is a rebound back to themselves?
Well, I think there are many things at work here. We like to think of life as this, easy linear effect of A affects B affects C. But think of your body. Your body is this impossibly complex element that has the innate knowledge to heal. You've got your autonomic nervous system. And of course, chiropractors will always talk about the autonomic nervous system and the energy system happening throughout the body, and that being the master switch. But I would argue that it's one master switch, but there are lots of others too. I mean, the cells, we know cells now communicate through several ways, including sound. So you've got all kinds of energies going on in the body. We also know that we are these tribal people. We need communities. So we've got the feeling of safety and community that's going on, that's having an emotional impact, that's having a physical effect on our autonomic nervous system. We're having a sense of oneness, bringing us into an altered state, which has something else to do with things. We have the psychic internet, the almost impossible to understand effects of intention that we don't completely understand. We can take guesses over psychic internet. We can look at things and say, well, it must be like entanglement. But there's an X factor here. When people come together, miracles happen. Because it's hard to argue, well, it was just my autonomic nervous system that healed a genetic defect or that made a blind person see. There's lots of things going on here. And I think that the power of community is something that we really have to explore more. When I started delving into it, I found that even when people are born with some sort of genetic propensity toward depression, for instance, there was one study looking at two groups of people with this gene. And that was, it's a short straw gene. You're supposed to, get depression from it. And they looked at Americans who had the better version of the gene and Filipinos who had the worst version. But they found that the Americans were ones that expressed it more, whereas the Filipinos did not. And the scientists put it down to the fact that the Filipinos live in an extended family environment. They have community there, and the community proved protective. You see that over and over and over again. And you see, community as a healing element too. As I say, people need to belong. When people belong in a group, they're less likely to get ill, or they're more likely to heal when they're with other people. So there is that whole community effect too that is protective.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, like Japanese immigrants from Japan. Japanese people are big smokers, the men are, and yet they don't have heart disease. And this has been a mysterious thing to epidemiologists. And they found when Japanese people moved to the States, some of them developed the same heart attack risk as the usual American, and some don't. This puzzled them, so when they drilled down, they found diet had nothing to do with it. So it didn't matter whether these people ate at McDonald's Big Macs and fries, or they had sushi and tofu. Didn't matter. What mattered was whether or not they had recreated the close community ties that they have in the old country. So that whole idea of community is hugely protective, and that is a big, big piece of all of this.
We are definitely social creatures and like to, as you say, run in packs or have our tribe. You know, you mentioned the nervous system. Core to who we are is, as you said, our energy, right? We breathe. So there is that fundamental component before even having a physical body. So it sounds like in your intention experiments and when people are sending, as we know also in remote viewing, right? Remote viewing, we are connecting with a target and receiving information. But what you're doing is you're guiding people to send information to others. And so we are perhaps lining up with the life force that we all share, which is, as you said, is also sometimes known as quantum entanglement, or how we might understand it today.
I think there's a lot going on here. I mean, when you look at a body, for instance, and there is an effect, I mean, conventional medicine says, well, if you have this receptor and you've got this other cell or this other element, this other mechanism that slots into this receptor, it should be a linear process, but it's not. One goes into loads of different things. So if you have an effect on one thing, it affects loads of other things, which is why taking a drug often has so many different side effects. It just doesn't go from tab A slotting into slot B. It goes into C, D, E, F, G. So I think that's very much the case here too. We have lots of things going on here that are measurable, but we also, to try to understand it as something simple, I think is very, very difficult. What we can understand is the outcomes, and I have recorded them. They're on video, and we demonstrate it. And we can also keep understanding a bit more and a bit more by doing these intention experiments, which is why I'm stretching this out to a very big event where I've got 4 scientists who will be doing all kinds of measurements, not only on the target. It's going to be a target that needs lowering of violence a great deal. And we're going to have people participating all around the world. But we're going to be looking at everything from changes on random equipment, random event generators, GDV machines, etc. But we're also going to be looking at immune system markers before and afterward, on the vagus nerve before and afterward, on healing effects before and afterward. We'll be surveying the participants and we'll be learning more about the effects. And we will hope to learn just a little bit more about the cause too.
The cause of
how all of these things can work, how it can possibly work, how we can have a thought, send it thousands of miles away, do it in a group, and have a healing effect on ourselves.
Yeah, definitely. When you're speaking, it of course makes me, and maybe some of those listening, it makes me think of prayer or healing intentions, which you're doing, but in the form of what some people know as energy healing or Reiki or Qigong. And those also have, some of those even have meta-analysis studies on them showing benefits for people as well. Do you see a similarity between those kinds of intentions with what you're doing?
Well, I think they're all in similar ballparks. I think prayer is different because prayer oftentimes is a supplication. It's saying, God, you decide, thy will be done. This is a very specific request to the universe. Also with prayer, oftentimes it is done individually. Sometimes there are some elements. There are, for instance, in the Jewish religion, they will have a group of 10 who have to pray together for somebody. But it usually is run by someone. Oftentimes there's a leader, there's a guru, there's something else. This is a democratic group that just do it together. They also all hold the same thing at the same time, the exact same language. And that's unusual. I think energy healing, again, we are thinking about, how does Reiki work? And we think oftentimes of an energy being run to send to somebody else. And I think there's a more subtle mechanism going on here. But, we are all talking about energy as a change agent. And all of those have a similarity in energy as a change agent. I would say with prayer has belief as an important factor. Sometimes with intention, we've had total skeptics who get affected. I mentioned the partner of a woman who was doing an intention experiment, having a major change in his life. We've even had a boy who tried to commit suicide, where I had my master class do intentions for him. He was in the hospital. He had broken every bone in his body, jumping off a 40-foot structure. And he got out of the hospital in record time, and it was very interesting. We did 3 intentions for him, and he experienced major changes, improvements every time we did. But here's the interesting piece of it. He didn't believe one word of what we were doing. He thought, he's a typical teenager. He thought his parents' belief in the power of intention was pretty stupid. So belief doesn't necessarily have to be a factor in somebody getting an effect. But I think I think what we have to do is to understand, and you talked about remote viewing and some other things too, is we're very different from what we've been told. We have this very mechanistic view of ourselves thanks to modern science and modern medicine and ideas that are more than 300 years old that say this is the way the universe works. And it's clear, based on discoveries that have happened over the last 100 years, that we're far different from that. We're a complex energy system that needs to connect and engage with other coalescences of energy, other people, in other words, and that we have powers that are not acknowledged. The power to see beyond our senses, the power to send our thoughts out. They're trespassers. They go beyond us. They affect other people and things. And we amplify that power in a group. It's clear to me that we do. It doesn't need to be, it's not a bigger the better. Because I've run various experiments where we've repeated them with different size audience. We don't get a bigger effect. A group of 8 is enough to heal someone from blindness. A group of 8 is enough to heal someone of cancer. So you just need a group and a common intention, and it is a gateway to the miraculous.
Very beautiful, Lynne. When you mentioned the boy who was recovering and his parents were part of your intention groups, a skeptic might say, well, if he was in the hospital, he was getting therapy and he was going to recover likely to a certain degree anyway. But it sounds like there's more going on there. Can you share what the more going on there is, and what did that boy make of his recovery once he felt a lot better, I imagine?
Well, the doctors didn't think he was going to live. He had jumped off this 40-foot structure onto hard ground. He had brain damage, nerve damage, and broke every bone in his body. So they weren't clear at all that he was going to make it. Every time he did, and of course we can't say hand on heart, the only thing that happened was intention. He probably had some good doctoring too. I can show you, the picture. If you saw the picture of him, his parents sent us a photo. It was pretty frightening what was going on with him. But he got out of the hospital in record time. His doctors were amazed. Did we do this? Well, who knows? But he certainly reacted. His parents kept a running commentary to me during the weeks that we sent intention. And it seemed like right after we did something, he had a big boost of improvement. And we've seen that with numerous other people too, where there was another one, somebody else in my master class, whose little boy was born with all kinds of defects, and we did all kinds of intentions for him. His intestines were blocked, and he had this problem and that problem. We kept doing intentions for him, and he would have a new problem come up, and we would do an intention, and the doctors would be amazed, etc. And we've had a lot of situations like that. Can we say, hand on heart, it's us? No. It's more interesting when we get somebody who hasn't done anything, like Lori and blindness, where we know, hey, the only thing she did was meet with her group. So what happens then? Is it that person's belief? Is it the power of the group? Is it something miraculous happening out of the ether? Is it non-local? I think it's a bit of everything. And that somehow marshals that body to heal. But what I do know is, and I've seen it many, many times, when people try to do it on their own, it's not anywhere near as powerful as the power of a group.
Have you done controlled experiments in relationship to the mirror effect where the receiver is unaware that they are receiving these positive intentions?
Oh, yeah. I have a rule of thumb that unless somebody is a child, a small child, or in a coma or unconscious, the Power of 8 group should get their permission to send healing. And we got that even in the case of the boy, Luke, who was in the hospital. His parents got his permission that we would do this for him. But yes, and except in the very beginning, I think he was unconscious. But we've had situations where people were unconscious and we did intentions for them. And they were, they got healed. They got better. We've had an extraordinary number of those where it was somebody who was in the master class. And then I think there was, I remember one where the husband was in the hospital and had sepsis. Doctors didn't think he was going to make it. He was unconscious. We did an intention for him, and this woman's group did an intention for him, and he was out in record time. They went on vacation 10 days after it happened. That's how powerful it happened. So we've had situations where people didn't know. So the knowledge isn't maybe the thing that's absolutely necessary.
Yeah. Anecdotally, I've worked in hospital settings, skilled nursing facilities, and it seems that more often people, when they have maybe more people cheering them on by sending them cards, if they're like in a rehab, I'm a licensed occupational therapist, if they're in like a rehab setting, that they tend to do better. And of course, it could be that social support, but there does seem to be something that may be also happening, definitely with what you're describing, because you have evidence of this. And also, those positive intentions can impact, for example, perhaps the mood of the doctor or the nurse or the therapist that day, that they are able to stay focused on their job and give that nice care to that person so that they can optimize their recovery. And maybe there's even something that's transferring to those caregivers that also optimizes the outcomes.
Oh, no doubt that caregivers, it's really important that caregivers do watch their language and their thoughts. I do a course called Become a Better Healer with the Power of 8, because I have noticed that even with the best alternative practitioners, they're often terrible in their own language and their thinking. I experienced this myself when I had a health challenge about 5-6 years ago. I started taking notes because the practitioners were terrible in their language. They were saying all kinds of negative things. Even my favorite, you're a shadow of your former self. And of course, I had to say to this person, excuse me, what am I supposed to do with that? Is that supposed to be healing? Because it certainly isn't. But there was one study, it was of placebos, but doctors who gave them, one group gave the placebo saying, I don't know if this is going to work. We're not really sure what you have, but we'll give it a go. And the other group were given a placebo by a doctor saying, well, whatever you have, it's pretty minor, or whatever they said. They said something very specific.
Or like, this is a pretty simple, you have a pretty simple case or something like that we can take care of.
Yeah, but they said, well, we know what you've got, and this is going to sort it.
Yeah.
And there was a 61% difference in outcome. So there's no question that that positive element coming from the medical profession is really important. But all of this, what we're really talking about is a whole other concept of medicine and healing. I mean, remember with our Life University study, all of the people who were sent intention were out of pain. They had improvements in pain markers. They had no idea what they were doing. So it wasn't even a placebo effect. They didn't expect to even be judged on that. They didn't expect to be healed because they weren't told anything about what power groups are. And yet we did, and they did.
You mentioned a little bit about the ethics of getting permission. What are your thoughts about the ethics of regions of the world or of countries where maybe they aren't aware of these intention experiments happening, although at the same time one can say we're all probably impacting each other with our thoughts and emotions and we're not aware of it?
What we try to do when we do an intention for, let's say, a war zone, is we don't take a side. We never take a side and people even said to me, oh, let's do an intention to make sure Trump doesn't go back in the White House. And I say no to that because I believe, number one, that everybody is welcome in my church, as I say, whoever they're going to vote for. And with something like Gaza, Israel, to give you an example, our intentions were for peace and ceasefire. So we weren't taking a side, and we can't imagine anybody who would be arguing for that and arguing against that. And that's the kind of intention we've always done: a lowering of violence, a lowering of a cessation of deaths and injury. And unless somebody is a terrorist or whatever, I think they're going to agree with it.
There might be some people who think that we should leave other people's free will alone and not impact their thoughts, emotions, behaviors, and so forth. What do you say to that?
As I said, we ask permission on an individual basis. I can't imagine too many people who live in St. Louis, Missouri, arguing against us doing an intention to lower the violence and killings. I can't imagine them there was one young man who went out to buy a 6-pack of beer, and the young boy that he had been mentoring shot him because he knew he had just received a couple of $100 as a tax rebate, and he wanted to get that. This was his protege. I can't imagine people living in that area with that kind of violence being upset by us sending an intention to lower it. And lower it we did by 43%. So that's my answer.
Yeah, definitely. And when somebody is not feeling well, they welcome somebody bringing them some soup, or they welcome, usually, most cases, if they get a card in the mail, a get well card, or those positive intentions in the form of maybe a vase full of flowers as well.
If that person is unwell, we're asking their permission. If they are unconscious and in the hospital, we're asking the permission of their next of kin. We're not just taking it upon ourselves. When we do intentions, usually for somebody who is unconscious or is a baby or a young child, it is at the behest of, and this is of the groups too, it's at the behest of one of their loved ones. So it's, we don't take it upon ourselves to just say, oh yeah, we'll do it on that person. And as I say, pretty much 98% of the people we do intention for ask for it.
Well, it sounds like there are overall maybe 100% positive results. Have you discovered any negative impact from any of these experiments?
No, we've not had a negative impact on any experiments. To date, we haven't really had a negative impact on Power of 8 groups. The only thing that may happen is it doesn't work. And that is the only negative thing that would happen, is we can't say 100% of the time it will work. With our master class, we do find this though. And we've run this every year since 2013. I run this year-long class. It's been a year-long one since 2015. I've found of the people who carry on meeting week after week after week, so they take 6 sessions with me of 2-hour sessions each. We're live and interactive. I teach them the 13 keys to intention mastery, how to overcome negativity with intention, how to use intention with relationships, and much more. Then I put them into groups based on their time zone, and they have to meet every week for a year. And of the people who stay with their group and keep meeting, the people who faithfully meet every week, we see close to a vast majority, sometimes close to 100%, who have some kind of major transformation. The people who don't, are the people who don't stick with it. The people who don't show up every week and then wonder why it doesn't happen. Because it's not me necessarily, it's the power of the group. It's the fact of the meeting. It's the connection that happens. It's all of those things that we discuss, that sense of oneness, the learning how to do it well. Miracles happen, and that's why they continue to happen.
It's very beautiful work what you're doing, Lynne. How much of a role do you think love plays in these intention projects and experiments?
Well, that's a great question. Love is everything. And that's what Jerry said. I now know what love is, because it is that love is altruism. You know, altruism is love in action. Doing an intention for someone else with no expectation of reward, that's love in action. Getting love from that whole group who you didn't know before, they were total strangers, that's love in action. Absolutely, it's love. And that is the element behind it. And, you know, I'm not the first one to say we just don't have enough love in the world. And when people do experience it, we're so used to being isolated. It is a huge change maker.
Yeah. I just had the pleasure of speaking with Jill Bolte Taylor, who had a stroke that wiped out her left side of her brain. And you're probably familiar with her, and she felt this oneness with the universe, and it really advanced her own brain research. And she actually said that what you just said, that we are love, and perhaps, and maybe more than perhaps, what you're doing is really tapping into this, that is an ocean we can all explore a lot more deeply.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that is the key element. You know, we don't have that experience of oneness in love. And here you have this little group, a little cauldron of love, sending love back and forth to each other. And, you know, I give people some strict rules with the groups with my master class, which is you have to be a positive force in that group. And we're quite strict. If people come in who are just negative and just bring down the group, we talk to them about it. And we say, look, this is your part to play in being a force for good, a force for love. And if you don't believe this, you don't belong in this group. But usually what we say is watch and see what happens.
Yeah. So positive state of mind, consciousness, and intention, love is very important. And I imagine there are those listening who are thinking, well, how can I do this? How can I create my own group and start helping others and also receive the benefits if that so happens? Great.
Well, for all of those people who are interested, I have a path to that. If you come onto my website, lynnmctaggart.com, first of all, you should find out about my giant intention experiment in 2025. So we'll be running this live stream with Gaia TV, or partnering with us. They've produced a documentary about my work, so you can find out further by seeing it. It's completely free. And you can find this out on my website, lynnmctaggart.com, how to see that, but also how to sign up for this major intention experiment, which is, like all of my intention experiments, completely free. So you can find out about that. For learning how to do intention, we have a community site with tens of thousands of people who are on it, forming Power of 8 groups. For running your own Power of 8 group, we have a community site. You can sign up if you sign up on my website and meet other people who are trying to create Power of 8 groups. We have tens of thousands of people on that community site. And I have a variety of courses, from my Intention Essentials foundation course to the upcoming masterclass, the year-long course, where it's live and interactive with me, with catch-up calls and clinics and groups that we put you into in your time zone. So you can find out about all of this on lynnmctaggart.com.
Lynne, is there anything else you want to share today about the mirror effect? I know we've covered a lot, but just wondering if there's anything else that comes to mind for you.
Gosh, you've asked it from every possible way. I really do think the key piece is altruism and love, altruism. Again, one of the things we are so used to is the whole idea of eat or be eaten. I better get out there and grab it for myself before somebody else gets there. We also, in this sector, talk a lot about personal development, self-help. And one of the things that I started thinking about after watching what was going on with the mirror effect was that could be kind of toxic, particularly with the very popularized views of manifestation. I want, I get. And I started thinking about that as I want, I get, and I get sick. I shared that story about the studies showing that the pleasure seekers focusing on self-help, living the dream, focusing on themselves, had terrible immune system markers. They were going to die soon compared to the people who are doing things for other people, who were living a life of service, who are going to live forever. So I think that other help is really what happens with the Power of 8, and other help is the key to your own salvation.
Yeah, beautiful. Because as many near-death experiencers share in their life review, they experience their life from the other person's perspective. And so really, we are more connected than we take ourselves to be.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And let's hope that everybody's life review comes out with all of the good that they did for someone else.
Beautiful, Lynne. Thank you so much for being with me today, Lynne McTaggart. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation again.
Thank you. It's been great being back with you.
And for those of you watching or listening, thank you for being with us, because you are the reason that we are here. Book 3 in the new Thinking Aloud dialogue series is UFOs and UAP, Are We Really Alone? Now available on Amazon.
You can now download a free PDF copy of issue 7 of the New Thinking Aloud magazine, or order a beautiful printed copy.